The topic today is, what does America First mean for Latin America? And that means a lot of things to different people. I'm drawing on 3 articles I've written for the Impunity Observer. The first was basically how the United States needs to refocus away from trying to control the whole world and more to its own backyard. The second is about how the problem of how, at present, the U.S. foreign policy is governed by people who are basically anti-American or have a progressive or leftist bias. And the third is about how this can be implemented now. So we're in a position where the actual America First agenda can be implemented because Donald Trump did win. So that's my latest article. So what does America First mean? Basically, 200 years ago, 1823, President James Monroe had, in his State of the Union speech, said that he introduced what became known as the Monroe Doctrine, that no longer could European powers interfere in the Americas. Okay, he also, and implying that was that from that point on, the United States would be the leader of this region. So the Monroe Doctrine has 2 tenets: one, no foreign powers to be interfering in this part of the world, and 2, the United States will be the leader of this part of the world. And so basically, America First is a reinvigoration or revival of this doctrine. It's a little bit different because, of course, we're not having the Spanish or the French or the British hanging around here. We have other powers. So the powers that the United States usually is concerned about are China, Russia, Iran. Those are the main ones, and then other terrorist groups that are from outside the area. So many of you will know, for example, that there are foreign international, let's say criminal or terrorist groups acting in Latin America, especially in a place like Paraguay on the border with Brazil. Why has this America First doctrine become, or Monroe Doctrine 2.0 become important right now? It's almost an irony that because the United States is in a vulnerable position, the United States is feeling almost defensive or aggressive, trying to protect its status. Because since the global financial crisis of 2008, the United States economically or financially has been in a weakened position. And you can see that the, let's say, geopolitical hegemony has gone down. We no longer live in a unipolar or singular power world, right? We're living in a much more combative or competitive environment with the Chinese, especially taking on the United States and in Latin America, mostly in South America. The United States is in a defensive or threatened position, is trying to reassert itself. The Chinese are making a tremendous inroads against the United States, and up until now have hardly faced any resistance. And that advance is especially the case in Latin America. From right here in Ecuador, we know that there's been a Chinese presence. There was we've done so many reports on this. There's been a front group as a travel agency, which is basically a money laundering operation to bribe politicians. There's the Belt and Road Initiative, where there's all sorts of infrastructure being funded or carried out by the Chinese. So the expansion of the Chinese has been an incredibly important, let's say, driver to the feeling in the United States that they have to reassert themselves in the area, that they can't be lazy or weak about it. However, at the same time, like I said, the United States is in a fiscal crisis. Now, this is the big issue the United States faces, that it is in a terribly weak position financially. The national debt is about 100% GDP. The interest on the debt has now surpassed $1 trillion per year. So that means that every single American is paying $3,000 per year on interest on the debt. And if you look at actually people who pay taxes, it's actually about 3 times that, because only 1/3 of people are paying taxes. So the U.S. is in a vulnerable position, and I'll get into implications or conclusions about what that means long term. But that's one of the considerations, that the United States needs to reassert trade dominance or success, just to reassert its, let's say, economic position. Yes, the US dollar is more vulnerable than in recent decades. And there's a big problem too, that there's growing recognition that the people who have embedded themselves in the United States foreign policy apparatus, the State Department, USAID and the like, have a fundamentally anti-American mentality. Like I said, a progressive or leftist mentality. But so many of you will have heard this, but if you go to Washington, D.C., about 95% of the people will vote Democrat or left. And so that obviously means that there's a problem, that American voters want one thing and the actual apparatus or the departments are doing another thing. And so America First is basically trying to get that back into line, bring those people back into line, either fire them or reassign them, such that the policy matches what Americans want. Okay. But I should actually add that there's a problem here, and this is one reason why, and this is one of the conclusions, that the America First policy or Monroe Doctrine may not be lasting, because there's a great deal of ideological confusion or conflict within the United States. There's not, let's say there is an American view or paleoconservative view. That view is under threat. And right now you can see all sorts of conflict within the United States trying to, let's say, establish dominance or reclaim it for what is the American view. And most Americans probably wouldn't even know what the American view or philosophy of government is, unfortunately. So that's one reason why I'm concerned that even if I agree with, let's say, the America First idea, it may not last or stand for the long term, because we don't know how long the sort of Trump era policies will last when he gets out of office. Aside from the two main points of keeping out foreigners and asserting U.S. dominance, what does this mean exactly? First, it's actually going to go beyond the Americas. So as far as in my opinion, Donald Trump and his administration want to build a new trade bloc, all the Americas and European nations. It's kind of like a transatlantic trade bloc. And it's really a battle with China, basically to say that we are the dominant party here and the Chinese will be kicked out of here. And all the countries in this area will have to choose whether they want to side with China or the United States. Okay, with this new era too, because the United States is placing pressure on other countries, you will see, let's say, changing dynamics from their end, not just from the United States. So one, which I'm very interested in, is that there is a strong likelihood in the next few years, part of Canada will become independent and they will switch to the US dollar. They will choose to side more closely with the United States versus Ottawa, the capital of Canada right now. You will see reduced foreign aid. As I noted, we have such a weak or vulnerable fiscal situation in the United States right now, and one of the most unpopular policies is foreign aid. Most Americans don't want it at all, basically. They just think, we're broke, why are we sending money abroad? And then to add, salt to the wound, this money is being used to pay for all sorts of ridiculous causes that Americans don't relate to or don't support. So my personal, my assessment is that money will have to be restrained. Now, not all of it, but a large portion of it will come back because the US voter simply does not want it. Now, to make matters worse, actually, is that if nations choose to side with the United States, that'll mean that a drying up of the Chinese subsidies or easy money. So the loans that have come from the Chinese or other investments will have to come back because basically the US will not tolerate that. I would like to announce my latest book, The Latin America Red Pill, My Search for Freedom South of the Border, available in Spanish as La Píldora Roja de América Latina. This book distills 15 years of exploration and analysis and is part autobiography. If you want to get past political correctness to understand the reality on the ground, read The Latin America Red Pill. You will learn how to survive the law of the jungle, when a move to Latin America makes sense, the key to entrepreneurial success in the region, what Latin America needs to achieve development, and a whole lot more. Go to Amazon.com or click the link below to get your copy. Thank you. Okay, this is another not so rosy outcome. Since the United States is so weak fiscally, they're going to try to tax the rest of the world. So, they will charge other countries for access to the US market. And also they will basically try to impose their tax burden abroad. So countries like Panama or those in the Caribbean that are tax havens will find themselves ostracized or isolated, unfortunately, because they're offering a competitive tax environment that the Americans don't want to see. Yeah, so you're going to see what I call the sticks and carrots, or carrots and sticks, where any country such as, let's say, Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua that does not want to align with the United States, they will find themselves in a whole lot of pain. Whether it's travel, whether their young people want to be students in the United States, tariffs, all sorts of diplomatic pressure, they'll find themselves isolated. And it could even be the case that this might be the turning point where the likes of Cuba and Venezuela feel like they just cannot continue with their dictatorships, that the Trump administration is much more aggressive, and they've chosen Marco Rubio, a son of Cuban immigrants, who is more aware of these problems. So they'll be much more combative with these dictatorial regimes. So what are the recommended proposals, or what can we do about this? My initial environment, like I said, there's some good and bad here, right? It's not all like rosy news, but the worst thing that any country can do, including Ecuador, is escalate, right? Do not poke the bear. Do not make it more painful than it has to be, right? So when the United States imposes tariffs, that is bad. But if you respond in kind, they'll just, go even more severe against you. So you have to almost take a loss rather than take a double loss. Now, when it comes to officials, assuming we can get some kind of changing of the guard in the United States in terms of their personnel, that will mean that similarly, countries, if they want to have a good bond or work well with U.S. officials, will have to appoint market-friendly personnel to their, ambassadorships or whatever it may be. And that means having some respect for things like free speech, decentralization, private property, the traditional American values. And if they don't, they'll face some pain or ostracism. This is an opportunity, especially in terms of, let's say, we've got more nuts and bolts policymakers. There will be funding now for more what we might say classical liberal or conservative projects. That means that if you have a project that favors better rule of law, let's say transparency regarding the legal system, or better enforcement, especially when it comes to narcos or cartels, that is likely to get funding now rather than, let's say, gender ideology or environmentalism that might have gotten more funding before. And I guess that might sit better with a classically liberally oriented party like CREO. Ecuador has already done this to some degree, although this was under threat recently, but any kind of disengagement with the dictatorial or leftist regimes in Latin America would be a smart idea, right? So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Bolivarian Alliance or that term. Yeah. So obviously Correa was just bosom buddy with this group, but under Moreno he backed away, and so my basic recommendation is to continue backing away. That this group will be further isolated and miserable, and you don't want to be a part of it. So, but not only that, of course, disassociating with China makes sense too. My point here regarding nearshoring is that as much as the United States is trying to basically corner China and make them pay for, let's say, being a combative regime and communist regime, challenge can be Latin America's gain, right? Their loss can be Latin America's gain. So nearshoring is just a term to say that we're going to promote our neighbors and allow better trade with them. So there are many opportunities, and these are already happening in Central America. This is growing like crazy. So there are basically online or services already being outsourced, and these can continue. And it's really crazy to me when I'm in the United States how their geopolitical enemy, outspoken enemy, is where half of the things are manufactured. So this can really be to the advantage of countries closer to home. And so it can be manufacturing, be many things. And the truth is that there could be even some, let's say, mercantilism or crony capitalism there, but so there'll be some subsidies or some kind of benefits given to promote that in the near future or as on an ongoing basis. Okay, so this is one that's probably very sensitive to Ecuadorians, that we have international criminal organizations that have really taken over this country. And I remember when I came here first in 2010, that was when they were just starting to arrive. I don't know whether it had anything to do with the citizen revolution. I'm not sure whether we want to say that, but it definitely is the case that there's, let's say, an alliance between the Marxist political parties and the narco-terrorists, right? And so that is, the Americans are aware of this. And unfortunately, even though you might not have a super Marxist or outspokenly Marxist president, the damage has already been done. So they're already here. So, like I said, my recommendation is that, and this is very difficult to enforce because we've documented the way that the prison system is basically taken over now. The administration is basically run by narcos. And so where do you start? It's very difficult to kind of clean house and have a functioning legal system. But I'm just saying that that's one of the chief concerns of Americans, that there is a growing international and organized criminal element in countries like Ecuador, and Americans don't like, they basically don't want to have to deal with it. but they feel forced to have to address this. And because it's not within their own borders, they have to kind of go beyond and take the initiative. Okay, so the monetary policy, obviously Ecuador already has the dollarization, although that is not, so I'm encouraging other countries to adopt the same stance, to take on the US dollar and go beyond that, to have what Panama has, which is we call monetary optionality, that yes, they use the US dollar, but you can use other currencies if you want to. You basically choose the best for you. And right now, Ecuador is not getting the full power of dollarization because the financial sector is still so closed to the outside, unfortunately. I mean, I've looked to invest personally in Ecuador. Paz has done the research with me. It can be a real pain, a real headache, because we wanted to invest, let's say, in Ecuadorian real estate from the United States, and the fees are so high, or the barriers are so high, that after all that, it's what's the point, right? The returns are the same. You might as well just stay in the United States and not deal with all the hassle. So the thing is that the full power of dollarization has not been utilized in Ecuador. Okay. And of course, but dollarization is a way to be on a, let's say, a positive or a stronger position with the United States. Okay, so those are the remarks I prepared. I'm really, I've followed CREO for a while, and I appreciate the presence you have here. So, but I'd love to have more discussion or questions about how Ecuador can engage with this new era in the United States. And yeah, like I said, from a classical liberal or perspective.